First, I wanted to thank you for inviting us and giving us the opportunity to talk to you about this very critical and urgent matter, which is the pending or imminent war against Syria and against Iran. I would like to emphasize this importance. Oh, that is great, thank you.
We've come into the light.
Before I start, I have put together some handouts for you, informational sheets, which I would appreciate. Keep one.
Oh, yes. Got it?
Thank you.
I'll take
Take that one.
I'd need two. You put them on the chair, I think. Okay.
This may not be very new to you or something that you don't know, but I thought it would help focus some of our attention on what is going on. First, before I start, I would like to add something to what Mike said about the Veterans for Peace, and that is we are all members of Chapter 21 of Veterans for Peace in Northern New Jersey. And I want to acknowledge the president of our chapter, my comrade Ken Dalton. I think one thing that he missed here about Veterans for Peace is that anybody can become a member of Veterans for Peace. So if you're interested, you don't have to be a veteran, you can become associate members with many rights within the organization. And if you're interested, please talk to Joanne or Ken. I want to start by emphasizing that, I was supposed to introduce myself first. Bahman Azad, Faraz is my name, depends on which organization I'm representing. I have a different name, I suppose. My Bahman name is with the Peace Council, and my Faraz name is with the Veterans for Peace. And comrades also confuse the two sometimes, they call me different names as well, right? And my records in St. Louis office is totally different. But I was born in Iran. I finished my high school and undergraduate school in Iran, and did my military service in Iran, and then came for graduate school to the United States. I was hoping that I would finish and go back, but I got involved in the student movement against the Shah of Iran, who was set up to rule the country since 1953 after CIA coup. And it was one of the reasons that I couldn't go back was that I wrote my master's thesis on the control of the Iranian economy by the American oil corporations. And interestingly enough, my father, who was a lawyer, who passed away, sent me a message that they have a copy of your thesis here, and you better not come back. And that was the beginning of my political exile. When the revolution happened, I was in the middle of writing my Ph.D. dissertation, and I was planning to finish and go back, and by the time I finished, there was a reversal in the course of the revolution and mass executions, especially of the left forces, and then I couldn't go back either. So I ended up being out of the country since 1973 without having been able to go back. Well, lots of things happened to my family after the coup. Our house, I was a kid at the time, was constantly being stormed by the security forces, chasing my father all over the place. I remember him jumping off the back window into the street alley and running away. Constantly storming a house for him. After that, they put even my 6-month-old cousin in prison with my aunt, trying to find my father, lots of other stories. And after the revolution, the same way, my father was a member of the Bar Association. When the fanatics in Iran tried to replace the Iranian civil code with Sharia law, the Bar Association objected, and they made a lot of protests and everything. So there was a crackdown on Bar Association and lawyers in Iran who were involved, including my father, whose license was revoked, and was put into prison and tortured for 2 years. And that was another reason I received a message from my father, my sister only was allowed to visit him in prison. And I got a message from him that they have photos of you all over the place in the United States, what you have been doing. So again, a message, we'll get coming back. But that was before the crackdown came also. So anyway, I've been in exile for the past more than 42 decades. And I'm trying to go back and see what's going on. But the reason I'm saying this also is because my opposition to the attack on Iran and threats against Iran is not coming out of the love of the Iranian government. I don't think it has anything to do with that. My opposition to the attack on Syria and intervention in Syria, the same way. It doesn't mean that Syrian government does not have its own faults and shortcomings and repressive policies. But again, everything is besides the point here when we're dealing with these issues. United States, Israel, NATO are not interested in people's human rights or democracy. They're after their own goals and objectives. And now the victims, the turn is for Syria and Iran to go down to complete this project. And I want to really talk about this project because it's very important and urgent. And it's very unfortunate that the peace movement is remaining silent. Not completely silent, but no reaction really is happening that is visible. Condemnation, yes, objections, yes, and this and that, but no action is being organized against what is going on. And the problem for us, and I have been discussing this within the peace movement with our colleagues at the same time also, that we need a proactive peace movement, not a reactive peace movement. And that is, we don't have to wait until they attack Syria and we take up and go out to the street. We have to do it beforehand. And that's a problem, because so far we have been just reacting. And we need to organize. We need to partner with each other, all the whole network, and coordinate action with regard. And one of the most critical ones at this stage is Syria and Iran. And I think we have to really pay attention and do something about it before it happens. I'm just coming back this last weekend. I just came back on Monday from Lisbon, Portugal, attending the Secretariat of the World Peace Council. And in fact, I don't know if you know, aware of the World Peace Council is a global peace organization, member of ECOSOC in the United Nations, and there are more than 120 countries in the World Peace Council. And this was the meeting of the Secretariat. And one of the, on top of many important issues that they discussed, NATO, nuclear weapons and everything else, was also a question of this threat on Iran and Syria. And it was decided, although the date has not been set, but I think tentatively the occasion would be the first week of August, coinciding with the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, that the World Peace Council is calling for a global action against threats and attack on Syria and Iran. And hopefully something will develop and I will let everybody know about that. But this is an action that is going on, but we don't have to wait. In fact, our concern led us to believe that we should start that a long time ago, and that's how we try to organize from within our chapter to bring this issue of Syria and Iran to the public and encourage everybody to participate and do something about it before it's too late. But the question is, Michael talked about all the huge military outlay that is going on, and forces now present in the Persian Gulf and in the whole region, in Afghanistan, in Iran, in Iraq, in Bahrain. The whole Persian Gulf is like downtown Manhattan, with all the traffic of ships nowadays, where warships is going back and forth. And Iran is surrounded by nuclear weapons. And Israel legally has nuclear weapons, right? Mm-hmm. And the two countries that are pushing Iran for having so-called nuclear project, which is civilian, are the two countries that are illegally using nuclear weapons or have used nuclear weapons. And now they're, shedding tears for nuclear proliferation in the Middle East, which is totally hypocritical. And it has nothing to do with Iran's nuclear project and has nothing to do with the question of repression in Syria. The question is, this is, I would use the term, many people shy away from it, a general imperialist project for the 21st century Since the collapse of Soviet Union, the neocons in the new project for the new American century developed this plan for a unilateral hegemonic control of the United States over the whole globe. And all of these steps that are being taken in Africa, in Latin America, in the Middle East, and all that are all linked to this general project. When the neocons came to office with the Bush administration and filled the cabinet, they started implementing the policy, and the main thing was Afghanistan and Iraq during their period of time. I'm sorry. And then with very careful pretense to not being involved, in fact, the United States under Obama is pursuing exact same policy with just a softer surface appearance, but not necessarily different in any content. Again, in that project for the new American century, countries were listed. There were several features to this project, and one of the handouts I gave you is a kind of abbreviation of that 90-page document that they put out, which highlights the important elements of that project. Thank you very much. Few things. That project identifies China as the main threat in the 21st century and calls for deployment of U.S. forces towards China, establishment of bases towards China, and having forward bases ready and rapid response forces in cases of emergency. What is happening in South China Sea now is one of those elements of that project that's happening. The United States is trying to establish a base in the South China Sea, and that's causing tension. But if you see the pattern of military involvement, okay, Afghanistan, of course, was the main obvious target first because Obama, Osama bin Laden was there, but then Iraq. But now you see it's shifting towards Pakistan now. It's all part of establishment of military bases, one after the other, another toward China until all places in circle. Also, it has to do with oil and gas shipments from Central Asia, Central Asian republics of former Soviet Union. They're landlocked and they have no access to ports. So the war in Afghanistan is also part of this whole project to bring the oil from Central Asian republics to the Indian Ocean for shipment to the West. That is also another project. Also, actually, Chevron has the concessions for the oil pipelines, and they can, until they secure Afghanistan so that the pipelines could be made and not be blown up every other week, they are not going to invest, but they're looking for that to happen. But Pakistan is going to be next, possibly, and beyond. So that's one thing. Second thing, part of this project is to bypass United Nations and make NATO the policeman of the world. They say, they explicitly say it, that the UN is not capable of defending the United States interests. And they say we cannot allow European Union to develop an independent military force for its own protection, because then US supremacy will be gone. So it has to be all brought under the new NATO, NATO expanded throughout the world, which is also happening. Okay. Third, preemptive strikes. The main purpose of preventing the emergence of any rival power, global or regional. Global is China and Russia, definitely. Possibly India and Brazil are emerging as those rival powers. Okay, so that's 4 countries. So globally, but then again, regionally, in different parts of the world, and definitely Middle East is one of those hot spots that they're really concerned about. But in Latin America, Cuba, Venezuela are the 2 targets, rival forces that are resisting the 21st century project that the United States has for the world. In the Middle East, the same thing. They already listed all of those countries that one by one they've been attacking or have attacked. They talked about Libya, Syria, Iran, Iraq, okay? And this is one by one is happening. They went through the whole process, and now it's Syria and Iran's turn, and possibly Venezuela's turn, and I explain why these are linked. So, Syria is not a direct objective for the United States and Western allies. In fact, the objective is Iran. In that document, it says that Iran is a more threat than Iraq. And it has to be pacified or subdued or destroyed. If they cannot bring down the regime in Iran through diplomatic or other kind of non-military ways, methods, probably the target is going to be a military target, attack on Iran, which is coming. But before they can attack Iran, they have to soften or just remove the support that Iran has in the Middle East, that is partly Hezbollah in Lebanon and Syria. So those two are the bridge. Subduing those two forces and suppressing those or destroying them is a precondition for attacking Iran. Okay? And Syria is actually the stepping stone towards Iran. Okay? And the question is why they are doing this. I mentioned the project for the new American century, and I think most of you probably have read it already and know what's going on. But another thing that we have to take a look at is that the question of oil and energy that the 21st century world is facing a problem. We know it has been predicted, and it is going on as predicted, that our fossil fuel sources of oil, are going to be drying up by 2050, 40, 50. Not completely, but there's some patterns happening. It's predicted, it was predicted, and that's already happened, that the oil production in the world would be peaking around 2000. The economic crisis in the West actually pushed it back a little bit to around 2010, 2015, and we have oil production has already peaked. If you look at the second handout I gave you, this diagram shows you that. Actually, they mentioned 2006 as a peak point. From that point on, the oil production has been falling throughout the world. Not enough new resources are being found around the world, and whatever is left of the original reserves, we have consumed more than half, and as we go down these reserves, it's much more costly to take the oil out, and it goes down, right? And all these methods, and this whole fracking and everything else that's coming, just a sign that they cannot produce as much oil in the regular way as they used to, and they're searching for every possible alternative to drag oil out of the earth. So we're dealing with the peak oil phenomenon that everybody has been talking about, but this peak oil not only brings down the total production, but all the oil reserves. It's predicted that most of the oil reserves outside Middle East is going to be exhausted by 2030. So Middle East by 2030 is going to be providing 80 to 90% of the world oil. Okay. Now within Middle East, it's interesting. Oil is produced through OPEC, right? We know OPEC. So within the total oil production, by the Middle East, by the OPEC, 90% will be from Middle East, and the rest is going to be from Venezuela. And the control of oil is one of the elements, control of the supply of oil. And many people think that, well, if we stop using SUVs and this and that, U.S. will not need oil. You know, that's not the idea. The United States is not after oil for its consumption. Right? 1/3 of our military use is, import of oil, use for oil, is going to the military. 1/3.
So ironic.
Of our oil consumption is going to the military and military-related industries. So by just stopping the military itself or wars itself, we can make ourselves at least survivable a little bit. But that's not the issue. The issue is not driving prices. The issue is that the United States is after controlling the supply of oil for its rivals,
Yeah.
Exactly.
which is China, which is Japan, which is the European Union, which is emerging Brazil and India. And whoever by 2030 controls the sources of oil in the world controls the world and the world economy. Okay, they can suffocate any of these rivals if they want to, if the US military is sitting on top of oil wells. And that's what's happening, and that's what they're after. And in order to do that, they have to crush all possible resistance in the Middle East to this project. Okay. And that is what is going on. It has nothing to do with democracy in Syria, and has nothing to do with Iran's nuclear project, which is absolutely irrelevant. Okay. So what we're looking at then is a global agenda for the control of oil, for the control of the world, hegemony of the world, and bringing all the rivals under control and subordination of the United States, primarily. And in doing so, what is required is control their sources of energy. And that's why we are in the Middle East and going through one war after the other. Okay. Now, I call your attention to this map on the first page of the handout. I want to give you some description of what's going on here. This map was actually developed by an instructor, a colonel, at the War Academy of the Pentagon several years ago. I'm sure some of you have seen it, but probably haven't paid much attention to the details of it. Okay. If you look at it in color, probably it's got much more understanding. If you look at some of the changes that are happening here, this is the project, this is the bottom one is what they're trying to create in the Middle East, redraw the map of the Middle East according to these plans that they have. Okay, so when we're dealing with Syria, you will see that the top part of Syria is actually cut off, given to Free Kurdistan, which is a US ally, right? The Kurds sided with United States forces in the Iraq war. If you look at Iraq is partitioned, which many of us suspected that this was the plan originally. In Iraq, the oil is in north and the south and nothing in the middle. Okay, so the top part, they created this independent Kurdish state, allied with the United States. In the south, they created this Shiite region, which is now not independent yet, but it is predicted that it will become, according to this plan, an independent state. Okay, in the middle, there's nothing. And the zone of the Sunnis. And that's why they're resisting it. When they say it's a Sunni war against Shiite and this and that, this is absolute nonsense. Kurds are Sunnis too, but they're on the side of the United States. It's not Sunnis versus Shiites. It's not Sunnis versus United States. It's a political, energy, economic struggle that is going on over resources. And of course, Sunnis are in the middle part, the Sunnis that live in the middle part, not all the Sunnis. Kurds are Sunnis too. They cannot live up with this partition. Okay, they cannot accept it, and that's why they're resisting it. Okay, so there's a partition of Iraq in three parts. Northern part going to so-called independent Kurdistan, Free Kurdistan. South part going to this new creation. It's called Arab Shia state. Another oil-rich independent state. And the desert part, Sunni Iraq, was going to be in the middle of it, right? So that's Iraq. The Iranian part is also interesting. And Saudi Arabian part also. You see the dark kind of extensions from that Arab Shia state on both sides of the Persian Gulf, right? The northern part of it is actually where the Iranian oil fields are. Iran doesn't have oil beyond that province. In Saudi Arabia, that's what the main oil fields of Saudi Arabia are. Okay, so they're planning to create this weird-looking, like a crab type of thing, extending on both sides of the Persian Gulf, controlling the oil for the whole region. And this is going to be an ally of the United States. Right? So that's that. Interestingly, Afghanistan is going to be extended into Pakistan, and free Baluchistan is going to be created partly from Iranian territory and Afghan territory and Pakistan territory, which is already, I mean, the movement within Baluchistan is under US influence and control. So, and that paves the way for the extension of the pipelines from the Central Asian republics to the Indian Ocean for export. So, and it's interesting that they are kind of partitioning Saudi Arabia into another piece also, which is the Islamic sacred state. So they're separating or carving out the holy cities out of Saudi Arabia. So if they're dealing with Saudi Arabia, it doesn't have anything to do with types of bin Laden anymore. You know, they leave that part to them and deal with the rest of the story.
Why is it? Can you repeat that? Why did they separate Islamic?
If you remember, bin Laden and the whole attack on the United States was as a result of U.S. forces being stationed
in the Holy Land,
in Saudi Arabia, and
in
the objection was that this is a holy land.
Holy Land, yeah.
Okay, and shouldn't be allowed. U.S. shouldn't be allowed to station forces there. So they're carving this out. Okay, this is your holy land. Go deal with it, and the rest is ours. So this is the general story. Of course, there is much more going on here. But one thing that is probably very surprising is that if you look at the question of Palestine and Israel, okay, it says status undetermined, which is interesting because probably they want to continue this thing conflict for a long time to go. So these are the objectives behind why our forces are in the Middle East. I just wanted to give you this overview, but at the same time, this time the case of Iran is not Iraq. It's going to blow up the whole region. Many people even talk of World War III as a result. So there is a need on board a peace movement, really, to take this issue very seriously and act preemptively. We have raised this issue instead of preemptive strikes that the Bush administration started. We should run under the slogan of preemptive peace strike. And we have to really begin to think about preventive measures. We shouldn't stay silent when the European Union lifts the ban on shipment of arms to Syria. This should be a critical point for us to respond to. But there was no response. This happened when I was in Lisbon this last weekend. The European Union lifted the ban on arms shipment to Libya. I'm sure it is the United States acting as, through a proxy doing this. Because it's mostly US arms going there. It's a question of which channel it's going through. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and now Europe. And they're escalating. And it's clear that given the current level of intervention, they cannot do anything with the Syrian government. They cannot bring it down at this level of tension. They have to escalate it in order to shift the balance of power. And they're planning to do it. It seems every step they're moving in that direction. And it's going to come soon, and we better be ready for it. Thank you very much.